Communications and Digital Technologies Minister Malatsi is reportedly considering a levy on local and international streaming services to address the funding challenges at the SABC. This was in a parliamentary reply to a question on alternative funding sources for the public broadcaster. Let's explore the possibility of this move, right, and what impact might it have on the sector. We speak to Leslie Adams, Sales Director, Reach Africa, and a streaming expert who's joining us live now. Leslie, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. So a lot of us confused by what exactly this could all mean, particularly when you think about the streaming platforms. And maybe, as an expert, tell me what you are deciphering from all of this.
So it's a very interesting process because, many broadcasters around the world are actually battling with funding, primarily due to the decline of broadcast television, due to the decline of advertising on broadcast television, because viewers are moving into a more streaming sort of led environment. And many of these services are internationally owned and don't pay local taxes. This is specifically a question in response to how the current shortfall of adherence to paying TV licenses is actually affecting the SABC's ability to remain properly funded. And a consideration to actually look at different funding models and a possible levy against streaming services like the likes of Netflix and others who are not locally based, who don't pay local taxes, would ultimately impact. So it's quite an interesting sort of space. It's not the first to be considered, by the way. Globally, this is actually a norm. In the EU, to give you an example, in the EU, back in 2018, they have a law that has been passed that international streaming services will actually contribute to the local industry, already contributing over €1 billion to their local sort of industry across the board. So it's not a unique South African unique experience. It's actually globally being adopted by different countries already in the EU. The UK now adopting that as well. And South Africa, I think it would be smart to follow in that space. SABC also needs to look at different licensing models around their content. Currently, other broadcasters like of eMedia and MultiChoice currently broadcast your content out for free. That could attract a licensing fee and assist in funding. So there are options to be considered in this space where, already in a constrained consumer environment, maybe the TV license isn't as effective as we'd like it to be.
So does it, when you look at it, right, does it change the dynamics, particularly for local and global streaming services? Can they reconsider their offering when you look at the South African market?
So I think it's quite interesting. It really depends on how it's applied, right? So I guess when you listen to the answer from the minister, it did seem as if the consumers would have an additional tax, where globally when it's been applied, it's actually been applied in reverse, where the streaming services themselves would actually cop up and pay forward a fee and an agreed amount towards the local broadcasting community or local cinema community. So that's quite an interesting one. So it's depending on how it will be implemented. From a consumer perspective, we're already seeing sort of a TV license default in a way where consumers are going, I don't see value to pay for this, therefore I'm not going to pay for it. And there currently is no sort of hiding or recall on that metric. If you don't pay a TV license, there's no recourse that can be made. In this particular instance, if you don't pay your monthly subscription, you then lose a monthly subscription for that particular period of time. So it really depends on how it's implemented. Will the consumer cough up and pay an additional sort of loading, or will it be up to the streamers who will pay then, let's call it a levy or a tax, back to the local industry, which they're currently exploiting?
Sure, quite interesting, especially because every time, you speak about anything that touches consumers and them paying more, it raises eyebrows, particularly in a climate like ours right now. And I suppose, as you say, it's going to be interesting to get the how and see what happens then. But let's just say, for argument's sake, right, it results in maybe a tax or something like that for the consumers. Can we then maybe see higher subscription costs for the consumers, or just your interpretation of how it might work if it gets to that?
So maybe let me set the context for you. Every single streaming service has had multiple price increases almost every 6 months within the space. So the cost of streaming services, the cost of pay TV goes up almost every 6 months and at least once a year. So the increase in price for the consumer is happening anyway. I think it would be unfair to say that a tax or a levy would be the primary reason behind an increase of subscription cost. That increase in cost has been happening probably for the last 7 years consistently, almost every 6 months. And we've seen the revolt in different price increases. So in the South African market, we've seen how the revolt against pay TV has led to the rise of streaming because it was assumed to be cheaper. that difference in cost is actually evening out to a point where there isn't really a cost benefit, and there won't be a cost benefit for much longer if you interrogate how much the streaming services cost individually and then combine as different users use them. From this perspective, again, depending on how it's implemented, should the levy be taxed on the consumer end? Yes, there could be an increase in cost as will be passed on to the end consumer. The other side of this would be possibly increasing or giving the streaming services a minimum number of investment into local industry to cover that cost. And remember, although we're paying in rands in South Africa, many of these services are earning in dollars and in euro. Therefore, there could be an affordability issue there. We've also seen premise of this happening already with the Competition Commission taking Meta and Google to the saying that they should contribute at least 200 to 500 million to local news services. So it's not unheard of that these international players who benefit from our local content, our local audience, and our local investment, and extract almost entirely everything from our country, being asked to contribute into the local community.
All right, Leslie, quite an interesting one. Thank you so much for putting us into perspective there, because, when one reads that, there are a lot of questions as to, is this going to be unique to the country? But as you say, it's nothing unique. It's actually been done before. The nub is going to be now in the detail if it actually becomes that, the model that the minister does consider. But thank you so much for explaining it so succinctly to us. Appreciate it. That is Leslie Adams, their Sales Director, Reach Africa, and a streaming expert.